Commander Veltar adjusted his breathing apparatus as the sleek Zephyrian scout ship, Harmony's Edge, drifted toward the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star system. The routine was always the same, and he had done this 47 times, before without incident. Locate a primitive species with basic tool use, demonstrate superior technology, recruit the strongest specimens as soldiers, move to the next system. The Zephyrian Confederation had built its military might on this simple formula for 300 cycles. The initial scans showed promise, and the dominant bipedal species had developed basic metallurgy and simple chemical propulsion. Perfect. Candidates for grunt work in the Outer Rim conflicts. Veltar activated the communication array and prepared the standard recruitment speech as his science officer completed the preliminary assessment. "Commander, we have an anomaly, Science Officer," Quinn reported with a slight tremor in his voice. "There appears to be an artificial construct moving through the asteroid field beyond the fourth planet." Veltar frowned and checked his display screen. The object was clearly artificial, but the design made no sense according to their technological assessments. It looked like someone had welded together pieces of scrap metal and industrial equipment into something that barely resembled a starship. The energy readings were all wrong too, as the craft was outputting power signatures that should have been impossible for a species at this development level. Perhaps they found debris from a more advanced civilization, Veltar suggested, as he ordered the ship to intercept. "We should investigate before making contact with the planet." The ramshackle vessel seemed to notice their approach and actually changed course to meet them halfway. This was unusual, as most primitive species either ran away or tried to hide when encountering superior technology. The ship looked like it had been assembled in someone's backyard using spare parts and pure determination. Hull plating was mismatched, and the entire structure should have fallen apart under its own gravity. "Incoming transmission, Commander," Communications Specialist Nex announced. "They are using a modified quantum frequency that should not exist at their technological level." "Put it through," Veltar commanded as he activated the universal translator. Static filled the bridge for a moment before a rough human voice came through the speakers. "Well, hello there, fancy ship. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Devil's Bargain, and we are having ourselves a mighty fine day out here in the black. What brings you folks to our little corner of nowhere?" Veltar blinked in surprise at the casual tone and friendly greeting. Most species either cowered in fear or immediately became hostile when first encountering alien technology. This captain sounded like he was greeting neighbors at a social gathering. "Greetings, primitive vessel," Veltar began his standard speech. "I am Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Confederation, and we come offering your species a great opportunity to serve the greater galaxy. Your strongest warriors can join our ranks and learn the ways of advanced civilization in exchange for basic technology and protection." A long pause followed, and then something unexpected happened. Laughter echoed through the bridge, and not just from one person, but what sounded like several crew members all laughing at once. The sound was rich and warm and completely baffling to the Zephyrian crew who had never encountered this response before. "Did you hear that, Lisa?" Captain Morrison called to someone off the communication channel. "They want us to be their soldiers because they think we are tough. Have you actually looked at our planet, mister?" A female voice joined the conversation, and she was still giggling as she spoke. "Oh, this is rich, Jake. Wait until they find out what Earth is actually like. Hey, alien guy, did you do any real scans of our world, or just the basic life signs detection?" Veltar felt a cold sensation in his primary stomach as Science Officer Quinn frantically began running detailed planetary analysis. The basic scans had shown a standard oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere with abundant water and appropriate temperature ranges. Nothing unusual about that combination. "We performed standard assessment protocols," Veltar replied carefully. "Your planet appears to be a typical life-bearing world with moderate environmental conditions." More laughter erupted from the human ship, and Captain Morrison's voice returned with an odd mix of amusement and something that might have been pity. "Oh, buddy, you really should have looked closer. Our planet is not what anyone would call moderate. Lisa, fire up the nature documentary package and send these folks our Welcome to Earth survival guide." The data package that arrived moments later caused every alarm on the bridge to activate simultaneously. Science Officer Quinn made a choking sound as the information scrolled across his screen, and 2 junior crew members required immediate medical attention for shock-induced paralysis. Earth was not a moderate world, and it was barely a world at all. The planet experienced regular mass extinction events that the humans casually referred to as weather systems. Massive storms with wind speeds that could tear apart most spacecraft regularly swept across the surface. The magnetic field fluctuated wildly, allowing deadly radiation to bombard the surface. Volcanic activity could reshape entire continents without warning. The atmospheric pressure changed constantly, and the temperature swings would kill most known species within hours. "This cannot be accurate," Veltar whispered as he watched footage of humans walking around completely unprotected in conditions that would require full environmental suits for any Zephyrian. No species could survive in these conditions. "Oh, that is just the weather report, buddy," Captain Morrison replied cheerfully. "Wait until you see the wildlife documentation. We have got predators down there that would give your worst nightmares anxiety attacks. Plus, the plants are trying to kill everything too, so that keeps life interesting." The second data package arrived, and Veltar watched in growing horror as creatures that belonged in the deepest nightmares of his species wandered around Earth like it was perfectly normal. Massive predators with teeth designed for tearing apart prey. Venomous creatures that could kill with a single bite. Plants that could dissolve flesh on contact. Ocean dwellers the size of small spacecraft that hunted in packs. "Your species actually evolved on this nightmare world?" Veltar asked weakly. "Evolved, adapted, and thrived, my friend," Captain Morrison confirmed with obvious pride. "Though to be fair, we did make it a bit more dangerous over the years just to keep things from getting boring. Nothing worse than a safe, comfortable existence. You know, they made it more dangerous," Science Officer Quinn repeated in a voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, these beings do not just survive on a death world. They actively seek out additional challenges for entertainment." The communication channel crackled as another human voice joined the conversation. This one belonged to someone the captain called Pete Sullivan, and he sounded excited about something. "Hey Jake, should we tell them about the ship modifications? I think they might get a kick out of knowing where we got most of our technology." "Sure thing, Pete. Go ahead and give them the grand tour." The next revelation hit the Zephyrian crew like a physical blow, and engineer Pete Sullivan explained that most of their ship's components had been salvaged, borrowed, or reverse-engineered from various sources, including a crashed probe from Mars that nobody was using anyway. The humans had taken technology from a survey drone that was supposed to be undetectable and completely beyond their comprehension, then figured out how to not only use it but improve upon it. "You stole our technology," Veltar said faintly. "Well, steal is such a harsh word," Pete replied with obvious amusement. "We prefer the term aggressive recycling. Besides, the probe was just sitting there collecting dust and we needed parts for the hyperdrive modifications." "You modified alien hyperdrive technology. Had to, really. The original design was pretty inefficient and we needed better fuel economy for the long hauls. Nothing worse than running out of juice halfway to nowhere." Veltar felt his worldview crumbling as he realized that these primitive humans had not only survived on a planet that would kill his species in minutes, but had casually improved upon Zephyrian technology while treating the entire situation as some kind of amusing hobby project. They were not soldiers or warriors in any conventional sense, and they were something far more terrifying. They were curious. Dr. Clicks clutched his datapad with trembling appendages as he tried to process the biological impossibility floating beside his ship. The human vessel, Devil's Bargain, should not exist according to every known law of engineering and physics yet. There it was, humming along quite happily, while its crew chatted about weekend plans and something called baseball scores. His report to the Confederation Science Council was starting to read like a horror novel, written by someone with severe psychological problems. The humans had invited the Zephyrian crew aboard their ship for what Captain Morrison cheerfully called a cultural exchange tour. Dr. Clicks had agreed, thinking it would be an excellent opportunity to study primitive technology and perhaps gather some biological samples from these unusual specimens. Instead, he found himself documenting a nightmare that challenged everything he thought he knew about life in the universe. Engineer Pete Sullivan met them at the airlock wearing what appeared to be a protective garment covered in colorful pictures of small Earth creatures. When Dr. Clicks asked about the strange clothing, Pete laughed and explained it was his lucky shirt with cartoon cats on it, because cats were fuzzy and made people happy. The concept of wearing images of predatory animals for emotional comfort was so alien that Dr. Clicks had to sit down for several minutes. The ship's interior looked like someone had raided a scrapyard and then decided to make the result more dangerous just for entertainment. Exposed wiring ran along walls next to what Pete called safety posters showing humans in various states of injury, with cheerful slogans like "Safety First" and "Remember to Duck." When Dr. Clicks pointed out that the electrical systems appeared to be one short circuit away from catastrophic failure, Pete nodded enthusiastically and said, "That was why they kept fire extinguishers in every room." "Fire extinguishers in every room," Dr. Clicks repeated weakly as he updated his notes. "The humans expect their own technology to try to kill them on a regular basis and have prepared accordingly." "Oh, that is nothing, Doc," Pete replied as he guided them toward the engineering section. "Wait until you see what we did to the reactor core. We found this neat trick for boosting power output by running the plasma conduits at about 150% of recommended capacity. Gets a bit warm sometimes, but the extra juice is totally worth it." The engineering bay was a monument to organized chaos that somehow functioned, despite violating every safety protocol in the Zephyrian technical manual. Spare parts hung from the ceiling on hooks and chains while jury-rigged systems hummed and sparked in patterns that should have indicated imminent explosion. Pete pointed out various modifications with obvious pride, explaining how they had improved efficiency by removing most of the safety systems and backup controls. "Safety systems just slow things down," Pete said, as he patted a control panel that was literally held together with some kind of adhesive tape. "Besides, if something goes really wrong, Murphy will let us know in time to fix it or evacuate, depending on how we feel that day." Dr. Clicks discovered that Murphy was the ship's artificial intelligence system that the humans had programmed with what they called a sense of humor and a healthy appreciation for chaos. When the AI spoke, its voice carried a distinctly sarcastic tone that suggested it found the entire situation amusing rather than terrifying. "Good morning, Dr. Clicks," Murphy said as holographic displays flickered to life around them. "Welcome aboard the Devil's Bargain, where safety is our second priority right after having a good time. Would you like to see our collection of improvised explosive devices, or should we start with the biological warfare samples in the kitchen?" "Biological warfare samples." Dr. Clicks gasped as his medical scanner began detecting dangerous chemical signatures throughout the ship. "Oh, Murphy is just being dramatic," Pete laughed as he led them toward what he called the galley. "We do not have biological weapons. We just have lunch." The kitchen area contained substances that registered on Dr. Clicks's scanner as lethal toxins, corrosive agents, and probable mutagens. Chef Anna Lewis stood over a heating unit stirring something that was producing smoke in colors that did not exist in nature. She looked up as they entered and smiled warmly before offering them samples of what she called her famous 5-alarm chili. "5-alarm chili," Anna explained cheerfully while ladling the smoking substance into containers. "It is called that because the first time I made it, Pete had to call the fire department. Turned out the smoke detectors were not malfunctioning." After all, Dr. Clicks watched in fascinated horror as Anna consumed a spoonful of the toxic mixture and proclaimed it perfect for a Tuesday lunch. When he asked about the safety of eating something that registered as a chemical weapon, Anna laughed and said it was actually pretty mild compared to her weekend barbecue sauce. The tour continued with stops at various stations where humans demonstrated their casual relationship with mortal danger. Communications Officer Lisa Rodriguez showed them the radio equipment that she had modified to pick up signals from distant galaxies because she was curious about what alien music might sound like. The modifications involved bypassing several critical safety systems and routing power through circuits that were never designed to handle such loads. "It worked great until last month when I accidentally tuned into what I think was a neutron star," Lisa said, while pointing to a section of the console that appeared to have been recently melted and resoldered. "Made this really interesting humming sound right before it overloaded the primary receiver array." Security Chief Marcus Davis introduced them to the ship's defensive systems, which consisted primarily of tools that had been repurposed from their original functions. The main weapon was something called a mining laser that Marcus had modified to run at power levels that exceeded manufacturer specifications by roughly 300%. "Does the job just fine?" Marcus said while demonstrating the targeting system on a nearby asteroid. "Of course, we can only fire it about 6 times before the cooling system needs a break, but 6 shots should be enough for most situations." Dr. Clicks updated his report with shaking appendages as he realized that the humans had turned maintenance tools into weapons of mass destruction simply because they thought it would be useful to have some firepower available just in case. They approached engineering problems with a combination of curiosity, reckless abandon, and what they called common sense that defied every known principle of safe design. Pilot Jenny Cross explained their navigation system, which combined stolen alien technology with human intuition and something she called seat of the pants flying. When Dr. Clicks asked about backup navigation systems, Jenny shrugged and said they had Murphy and a really good map of the local star systems that Pete had, drawn on the back of a food container. "Besides," Jenny added with a grin that showed far too many teeth, "getting lost is half the fun of space travel. You never know what interesting stuff you might find when you end up somewhere unexpected." The final stop on the tour was the observation deck where Captain Morrison was waiting with refreshments and what he called the Earth Cultural Orientation package. Dr. Click settled into a chair that appeared to be made from salvaged crash webbing and tried to prepare himself for whatever horrors awaited in the data files. "Now, Doc," Captain Morrison said as he activated the display screens, "I want you to understand that what you are about to see represents a pretty typical day on Earth. Nothing too exciting or unusual, just regular everyday life for humans." The first video showed human children engaged in what was labeled as playground activities. Dr. Clicks watched in growing disbelief as small humans hurled themselves through the air on devices designed to simulate falling, spinning, and high-velocity impacts. The children were laughing and appeared to be enjoying the experience of subjecting themselves to forces that would crush most adult Zephyrians. "Your offspring trained for survival using equipment that simulates mortal danger," Dr. Clicks whispered. "Train is a strong word," Captain Morrison replied. "They are just having fun. Kids love anything that gets their blood pumping and makes them feel like they might die." Dr. Clicks felt his sanity slipping away as he realized that humans considered near-death experiences to be recreational activities suitable for their young. Admiral Zexhai read Commander Veltar's initial report 3 times before accepting that his subordinate had not suffered some kind of mental breakdown in deep space. The details seemed impossible, but the supporting data was undeniable, and the High Command faced a situation unlike anything in their extensive military history. The species they had expected to be primitive warriors appeared to be something far more dangerous and completely unpredictable. The Admiral's first instinct was to classify the entire system as a quarantine zone and forbid any further contact, but the strategic implications were too significant to ignore. If these humans could reverse engineer Zephyrian technology and improve upon it while treating their Deathworld planet as a casual living environment, then they represented either the greatest threat or the greatest opportunity the Confederation had ever encountered. After lengthy deliberations with the War Council, Admiral Zexhai decided to dispatch a full diplomatic fleet of 12 ships with himself commanding from the flagship. The mission would be to establish formal contact with Earth's governing bodies and negotiate a proper military alliance based on mutual benefit rather than the standard recruitment protocol. Surely once they spoke with the humans' actual leadership, the situation would become more manageable. The crew of Devil's Bargain received news of the incoming fleet with what Captain Morrison described as uncontainable glee. When Admiral Zexhai transmitted formal request for escort to Earth, the human response was immediate and enthusiastic. They would be delighted to help with first contact and could provide valuable guidance about Earth customs and diplomatic protocols. "This is going to be so much fun," Communications Officer Lisa Rodriguez announced as she coordinated with the Zephyrian fleet. "Wait until they see what we consider a quiet week back home." Captain Morrison plotted a course that would bring the alien fleet to Earth during what he assured Admiral Zexhai was a perfectly normal time period with nothing unusual or exciting happening planet-wide. The humans seemed genuinely eager to help, and their casual friendliness was somewhat reassuring to the Admiral, who had begun to worry that the initial reports might have been exaggerated. The fleet emerged from hyperspace, at the edge of Earth's solar system during what the humans cheerfully described as a pretty typical Tuesday in late autumn. Admiral Zexhi's first glimpse of the planet showed what appeared to be a beautiful blue and green world with swirling white clouds and vast oceans. For a moment he allowed himself to hope that Commander Veltar had somehow misunderstood the local conditions. Then the detailed scans began arriving, and Admiral Zexhi felt his confidence evaporating like moisture in a desert wind. The planet was currently experiencing a Category 5 hurricane that covered an area larger than most Zephyrian continents. Atmospheric wind speeds were approaching 200 kilometers per hour, and the storm was generating electrical activity that could power a small city. Weather satellites showed the massive spiral of destruction moving across populated areas where millions of humans lived. Captain Morrison, Admiral Zexhi transmitted urgently. Your planet appears to be under attack by some kind of atmospheric weapon. Should we assist with evacuation procedures? Laughter filled the communication channel, and Captain Morrison's voice carried its usual tone of casual amusement. Oh, that is just Hurricane Betty doing her thing, Admiral. Nothing to worry about, really. The folks down there have been through worse, and they know how to handle a little wind and rain. A little wind and rain, Science Officer Yill repeated weakly, as she monitored readings that showed atmospheric conditions capable of destroying spacecraft. Admiral, they are referring to planetary-scale destruction as minor weather. The situation became more surreal as additional data streams revealed other ongoing events across Earth's surface. A volcanic eruption in the Pacific Ring of Fire was reshaping an entire island chain, while local humans discussed whether the lava flows would improve tourism or create better surfing conditions. 3 separate armed conflicts were taking place on different continents, with casualty reports that would represent major disasters for any civilized species being treated as routine news updates. Most disturbing of all was what the humans described as a minor nuclear accident at a power generation facility. The radiation levels would require full evacuation of any Zephyrian settlement, but the local authorities were treating it as a maintenance issue that would be resolved by the weekend. Workers in protective suits were actually joking with news reporters about overtime pay and whether the cleanup crew would finish in time for someone's birthday party. They are treating nuclear contamination as a scheduling inconvenience, Admiral Zexhi said to his senior staff as they watched the news broadcasts in stunned silence. These beings live on a planet that tries to kill them constantly, and they respond by making jokes and planning social gatherings. Engineer Pete Sullivan provided regular updates about Earth conditions as the fleet approached, and his enthusiasm for what he called normal planetary activities was deeply unsettling. He mentioned that the current week was actually pretty quiet compared to last month, when they had experienced a solar flare, a magnitude 7 earthquake, and what he described as an unusually active tornado season all at the same time. Unusually active tornado season, Admiral Zexhi repeated as he reviewed footage of atmospheric vortexes that could lift and destroy anything in their path. How many of these destructive phenomena occur during a normal season? Oh, maybe 2 or 3,000 depending on the year, Pete replied casually. Nothing too dramatic, really. The big ones only show up every few years, and those are the ones that get everyone excited. Admiral Zexhi began formal diplomatic contact with Earth's various governments, expecting to negotiate with beings who understood the serious nature of galactic politics and military affairs. Instead, he found himself speaking with leaders who seemed more interested in whether the aliens had any interesting wars they could help with than in receiving advanced technology and protection. The president of the largest Earth nation listened politely to Admiral Zexhi's offer of alliance and technological exchange, then asked if the Zephyrians had ever dealt with anything really challenging, like asteroid impacts, solar radiation, or ice ages. When the Admiral explained that such events would end Zephyrian civilization, the president laughed and mentioned that humans considered those things bad weather days that required staying indoors and watching movies. Movies, Admiral Zexhi asked weakly. Oh, you are going to love human entertainment, communications specialist Amy Foster interrupted cheerfully. We make all kinds of fictional scenarios for fun. Horror movies, action films, disaster pictures. Most of our entertainment involves people surviving impossible situations or fighting monsters that do not actually exist. The Admiral felt a cold sensation spreading through his circulatory system as he realized that humans created imaginary scenarios more terrifying than most species' actual histories, and then watched them for pleasure. When Amy offered to transmit a sample of human entertainment, the Admiral accepted, thinking it might provide insight into their psychology and cultural values. The entertainment package that arrived contained what humans called classic films, representing their finest artistic achievements. Admiral Zexhai watched the first few minutes of something called Jaws and immediately required medical attention for stress-induced paralysis. The idea that humans had created a fictional scenario about oceanic predators hunting people and then convinced other humans to watch it voluntarily was beyond his comprehension. Chief Medical Officer Tony Baker made the situation worse by offering to help treat what he described as obvious stress disorders among the Zephyrian crew. His medical assessment suggested that the aliens might benefit from some light exposure therapy to build up their constitution and improve their stress tolerance. When Admiral Zexhai asked about the treatment, Tony cheerfully explained that it involved gradual exposure to Earth documentaries, starting with nature programs and working up to extreme sports coverage. Extreme sports coverage, the Admiral whispered. Oh, sure. Humans do all kinds of crazy stuff for fun. Jumping out of aircraft, throwing themselves off cliffs, racing vehicles at dangerous speeds. Really gets the blood pumping and helps build character. The breaking point came when Captain Morrison casually mentioned that Earth's nature documentaries were considered relaxing entertainment suitable for human children. He offered to transmit a few educational programs that kids watch to learn about their planet's wildlife and natural systems. Admiral Zexhai made the mistake of accepting the offer and spent the next hour watching something called Planet Earth that featured creatures from humanity's worst nightmares wandering around, being described in cheerful narration as wonderful examples of natural beauty and biological diversity. The narrator spoke about predators that could swallow prey whole, as if they were discussing flower arrangements, while footage showed hunting behaviors that belonged in military training videos. When the documentary concluded, Admiral Zexhai realized that the Zephyrian Confederation had made a terrible mistake, and they were not dealing with potential allies or enemies, but with something far more dangerous. They had encountered a species that treated the impossible as routine, the terrifying. Dr. Clix volunteered for the surface expedition to Earth, despite his growing certainty that the mission would end in disaster because his scientific curiosity had overcome his sense of self-preservation. The joint research team consisted of 12 Zephyrian specialists in full environmental suits, accompanied by 6 humans who seemed genuinely excited about showing off their home planet. Captain Morrison had assured Admiral Zexhai that they would visit only the safest and most peaceful locations to avoid any unnecessary stress for the alien visitors. The landing site was what biologist Karen White described as a lovely nature preserve in what used to be called Yellowstone National Park. She explained that the area was perfect for introducing visitors to Earth's more gentle wildlife and scenic, natural features. Dr. Clix felt somewhat reassured until his environmental suit began registering atmospheric readings that would be considered lethal contamination levels on any civilized world. The air itself is poisonous, Dr. Clix announced, through his suit's communication system as he checked the readings for the 3rd time. Oxygen levels are dangerously high, and there are trace amounts of corrosive gases throughout the atmosphere. Karen laughed as she walked beside him, wearing nothing more than what she called hiking clothes and a light jacket. Oh, that is just normal mountain air. Pretty clean, actually, compared to some of the big cities. The oxygen levels up here are a bit thin, but nothing that will hurt you unless you have breathing problems. Thin oxygen levels, Medical Officer Jex repeated weakly, as his scanner showed atmospheric concentrations that would support combustion, at rates capable of creating explosive conditions. Dr. Clix, they consider an oxygen-rich environment to be thin air. The nature walk became a nightmare expedition as the Zephyrian team encountered Earth's idea of harmless local wildlife. A creature that Karen cheerfully identified as a black bear wandered into view, and several humans immediately began taking pictures while discussing whether it looked friendly enough to approach. Dr. Clix watched in horror as a predator capable of tearing apart armored vehicles was treated like an interesting photo opportunity. That creature could kill your entire group without effort, Dr. Clicks warned as he readied his emergency beacon for immediate evacuation. Oh, bears are usually pretty chill, Karen replied as she continued taking pictures. This one looks well-fed and relaxed. Probably just curious about the new visitors. Hey there, buddy, are you having a good day? The bear looked at the group for several moments, then apparently decided they were not worth investigating, and wandered off to continue whatever bears did when they were not terrifying alien scientists. Karen seemed disappointed that the encounter had been so brief and mentioned that they might see something more exciting if they were lucky. More exciting, Dr. Clicks whispered as he updated his survival log. The expedition continued with stops at various points of interest where Karen pointed out examples of Earth's supposedly gentle ecosystem. Every plant, flower, and tree they encountered registered on Dr. Clicks's biological scanner as containing compounds that ranged from mildly toxic to completely lethal. When he mentioned this discovery, Karen nodded enthusiastically and began explaining which ones were edible and which ones humans used for medicinal purposes. You consume biological toxins as medicine, Dr. Clicks said faintly. Well, everything is poisonous if you use too much, Karen explained while picking berries from a bush that was producing readings similar to a chemical weapons laboratory. The trick is knowing the right amounts and preparation methods. These little guys are great for making jam, but you have to be careful not to eat the seeds because those will definitely ruin your day. The situation deteriorated further when they encountered a group of human children on what their supervisor called a school field trip. Dr. Clicks watched in fascinated terror as small humans between the ages of 6 and 10 years old explored an environment that would kill adult Zephyrians within minutes. The children were laughing and playing games while their teacher pointed out various examples of local flora and fauna. Your offspring are exposed to this Deathworld environment as part of their education, Dr. Clicks observed. Kids love getting outside and learning about nature, the teacher replied cheerfully. Fresh air and sunshine are great for growing minds and bodies. Plus, they need to understand their environment if they are going to take care of it when they grow up. One of the children approached Dr. Clicks with obvious curiosity and asked if he was wearing a spacesuit because he looked like an astronaut. When Dr. Clicks explained that his environmental protection was necessary for survival, the child laughed and said that was silly because the air outside was perfectly fine for breathing. The child then demonstrated by taking an exaggerated deep breath and proclaiming that mountain air was the best air in the world. Their young consider lethal atmospheric conditions to be recreational breathing opportunities, Dr. Clicks reported to his team as they continued deeper into the preserve. The expedition reached its lowest point when they encountered what Karen described as a family of perfectly harmless deer grazing in a meadow. Dr. Clicks's biological scanner immediately identified the creatures as armed with pointed weapons growing from their heads and warned of potential charging attacks. When he shared this assessment with the humans, Karen looked confused and explained that deer were actually prey animals that were more afraid of humans than humans were of them. Prey animals, Dr. Clicks repeated as he watched creatures that could impale him with their natural weapons. You consider armed quadrupeds to be prey? Well, sure, Karen replied. Deer are pretty low on the food chain around here. They mostly just eat plants and try to avoid anything that might want to eat them. The antlers are mainly for showing off during mating season, though I guess they could hurt someone if the deer got really scared. The revelation that humans classified weapon-bearing creatures as prey animals rather than threats led Dr. Clicks to a disturbing realization about Earth's predator hierarchy. If deer were considered prey, then what did humans consider to be actual predators worth worrying about? When he asked this question, Karen's expression became thoughtful, and she mentioned that the really dangerous stuff usually stayed away from populated areas during the day. Really dangerous stuff, Dr. Clicks prompted weakly. Oh, you know, mountain lions, wolves, maybe a grizzly bear if you get unlucky. Nothing too serious as long as you pay attention and do not do anything stupid like try to feed them or get between mothers and their babies. Agricultural specialist Ryan Clark joined the conversation at this point and began explaining human farming techniques that involved deliberately cultivating what the Zephyrians would classify as biological warfare agents. Humans grew plants that produced capsaicin compounds capable of causing severe tissue damage and consumed them as food additives. They raised crops that contained natural pesticides and toxins, then processed them into products considered safe for daily consumption. You deliberately cultivate poisonous plants as food sources, Dr. Click said. Well, when you put it that way, it sounds kind of weird, Ryan admitted with a laugh. But hot peppers add great flavor to food, and most of the other stuff is perfectly safe once you cook it properly. Humans have been eating these things for thousands of years, so we have gotten pretty good at knowing what works and what does not. The final revelation came when the expedition encountered what Karen called a perfectly normal family, having a picnic lunch in the meadow. Dr. Clicks watched in amazement as humans sat on the ground in an unprotected environment consuming substances that registered as controlled chemicals while small children played nearby games that involved running and jumping in ways that simulated combat training. This is considered recreational family activity, Dr. Clicks announced to his increasingly traumatized team. Sure is, the family patriarch replied cheerfully as he offered to share their food with the alien visitors. Nothing beats a day in the great outdoors with good food and family. You folks are welcome to join us if you want to try some real Earth cooking. Dr. Clicks politely declined the offer of what his scanner identified as potential biological weapons disguised as sandwiches, and began calculating how long it would take to reach the evacuation site. The human's casual attitude toward mortal danger had moved beyond disturbing and entered the realm of completely incomprehensible. When the expedition finally returned to the landing site, Dr. Click submitted his report with hands that shook so badly he could barely operate his datapad. His conclusions were simple and terrifying, and the humans had not just adapted to survive on their death world, but had made it into a recreational playground where they brought their children for educational outings and families gathered for social activities. The species that had casually improved upon Zephyrian technology while treating their nightmare planet as a fun place to live were not warriors or conquerors, and they were something far more dangerous, and they were happy. The Zephyrian High Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 300 cycles, as reports from Admiral Zexhi's expedition reached the capital world. Council chambers that had witnessed debates about territorial expansion and resource allocation now echoed with discussions about a threat unlike anything in their recorded history. The humans were not invaders or conquerors seeking to dominate the galaxy, and they were something potentially more dangerous, and they were curious explorers who treated impossible challenges as entertainment opportunities. High Chancellor Mordak read the compiled reports with growing disbelief as evidence mounted that humanity represented a fundamental shift in galactic power dynamics. These beings had achieved spaceflight despite living on a planet that should have killed them millions of years ago. They improved alien technology through casual experimentation and treated situations that would terrify seasoned Zephyrian warriors as normal daily activities suitable for children and elderly family members. The question before this council is simple, High Chancellor Mordak announced to the assembled representatives. How do we deal with a species that considers our worst nightmares to be recreational activities while possessing the technological capability to travel between stars? The debate that followed lasted for days as council members struggled to categorize humanity within existing diplomatic frameworks. Traditional options included military alliance, territorial negotiation, trade agreements, or quarantine protocols. But none of these seemed appropriate for dealing with beings who had accidentally become the galaxy's most dangerous species, simply by surviving their own planet. Meanwhile, the crew of Devil's Bargain found themselves in the unusual position of serving as unofficial ambassadors for humanity. Captain Morrison had never intended to represent his entire species in galactic politics, but the situation seemed to call for someone who understood both human nature and alien sensibilities. His solution was typically human and practical and completely unofficial. "Look, Admiral," Captain Morrison said during one of his regular communication sessions with Zexhi, "I think you folks are overcomplicating this whole situation. Humans are not looking to conquer anybody or take over the galaxy. We just want to see what is out here and maybe learn some interesting stuff along the way." Admiral Zexhi had been trying to understand human motivations for weeks without success, and the idea that an entire species might be driven primarily by curiosity rather than conquest or survival needs, was difficult to accept. Every other species the Confederation had encountered operated according to predictable patterns of territorial expansion, resource acquisition, or defensive positioning. Your species achieved interstellar travel simply because you wanted to explore. Admiral Zexhai asked for clarification. Pretty much, Captain Morrison confirmed cheerfully. Earth got kind of boring after we figured out most of the interesting stuff, so we started looking up at the stars and wondering what was out there. Space seemed like the next logical place to go adventuring. The breakthrough in understanding came when director Kevin Stone requested permission to document the first contact situation for what he described as a simple documentary project. Kevin had been filming the cultural exchange between humans and aliens, thinking it would make an interesting educational program about space exploration and diplomatic relations. When Kevin showed his preliminary footage to the Zephyrian delegation, the aliens experienced something unprecedented in their species' history. They discovered that humans created fictional scenarios for entertainment that were more terrifying than most civilizations' actual historical experiences. Movies about natural disasters, alien invasions, and apocalyptic events were considered normal entertainment suitable for general audiences. You create imaginary catastrophes for pleasure, Dr. Click said weakly, as he watched preview clips from what Kevin called classic science fiction films. Sure, Kevin replied enthusiastically, as he set up his camera equipment. People love stories about overcoming impossible odds and surviving dangerous situations. Makes us feel good about our own problems when we see fictional characters dealing with stuff that is way worse than anything we actually face. The concept that humans deliberately expose themselves to psychological stress through entertainment media was revolutionary to the Zephyrians, who had never encountered a species that sought out anxiety-inducing experiences for pleasure. When Kevin offered to share examples of different entertainment genres, the aliens accepted, thinking it might provide insight into human psychological development. The screening session that followed became legendary among Zephyrian cultural analysts as the moment they finally understood what made humans unique. Kevin presented what he called a mild selection of popular films, starting with adventure stories and working up to what humans considered moderately exciting action pictures. Each movie contained scenarios that would represent existential threats to Zephyrian civilization, while human audiences apparently cheered for more danger and higher stakes. This entertainment contains more violence and destruction than our military training simulations, Admiral Zexhai observed during a break between films. Oh, this is pretty tame stuff, Kevin laughed as he loaded the next selection. Wait until you see our horror movies. Those are the ones where we really let our imaginations run wild. The aliens declined to view horror films after Kevin's brief description of the genre convinced them that human imagination was capable of producing scenarios worse than anything they could survive psychologically. Instead, they requested information about human recreational activities and discovered that the species regularly engaged in what they called extreme sports that involved deliberately placing themselves in mortal danger for entertainment purposes. Security. Chief Marcus Davis provided demonstrations of human physical capabilities that challenged everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about biological limitations. Humans could survive in environmental conditions that would kill most species, while performing athletic activities that exceeded the physical capabilities of engineered combat units. When Marcus mentioned that these abilities were considered normal for healthy adult humans, the aliens requested immediate medical evaluations to determine if they were dealing with a species of naturally enhanced super soldiers. We are not super soldiers, Marcus explained patiently as human volunteers demonstrated feats of strength, endurance, and agility that impressed even veteran Zephyrian military personnel. This is just regular human stuff. Most people back home could do everything you have seen today with maybe a few weeks of basic training. The revelation that human baseline capabilities exceeded Zephyrian military standards led to a fundamental reassessment of galactic power structures. The Confederation realized they were not dealing with potential recruits or allies, but with a species that had accidentally become the galaxy's apex predators simply by adapting to survive on their home planet. Negotiations took an unexpected turn when the humans learned about Zephyrian entertainment industries and expressed genuine interest in alien cultural productions. Captain Morrison requested samples of Zephyrian music literature and art, thinking his crew might enjoy experiencing different artistic traditions from across the galaxy. The cultural exchange revealed that Zephyrian entertainment focused on themes of harmony, cooperation, and peaceful resolution of conflicts. Their most exciting adventure stories involved diplomatic negotiations and successful trade agreements, while their music emphasized calm relaxation and emotional stability. Your entertainment is designed to reduce stress and promote mental health, Captain Morrison observed after reviewing several Zephyrian cultural programs. Of course, Admiral Zexhai replied with some confusion. Why would anyone create entertainment that increased anxiety or psychological distress? Different strokes for different folks, I guess, Captain Morrison said with a shrug. Humans like a bit of excitement to get the blood flowing, but your stuff has its own appeal. Very relaxing after a long day of dodging asteroids and fixing reactor leaks. The final negotiations resulted in humanity joining the Galactic Confederation, not as soldiers or allies, but as something entirely new. The humans became the galaxy's first extreme environment specialists and recreational fear consultants. Their unique psychological makeup and casual relationship with mortal danger made them ideal for situations that would traumatize other species. The Zephyrians discovered that having humans around made their own challenges seem manageable by comparison. Problems that had seemed insurmountable suddenly appeared trivial when discussed with beings who considered planetary extinction events to be minor weather inconveniences. This psychological effect led to unprecedented cooperation and expansion across Confederation space as member species gained confidence to tackle previously impossible projects. Captain Morrison and his crew continued touring the galaxy in Devil's Bargain, serving as unofficial human representatives, and accidentally solving diplomatic crises simply by existing. Their presence at negotiations reminded other species that the universe contained far worse things than trade disputes or territorial disagreements. The story concluded with Commander Veltar filing his final report as the newly appointed human liaison officer. His recommendations were simple and pry: